come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Hi, and welcome to Just Breathe, a podcast for religious education professionals, youth, emerging adults, and really anyone that likes to talk about Unitarian Universalism. If somehow you stumbled upon this podcast and you don't know what Unitarian Universalism is, well, it's your lucky day. You can head to www.uua.org and learn a little bit more about Unitarian Universalism there. We're really excited for a great conversation about transformation today, but first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ember Kelly. I use she and her pronouns. And today we are returning to YouTube for our podcast for the first time in a while. So I'm going to include a visual description. I am a 30-something white trans woman. I have an overall pretty neutral background besides a little edge of a painting sticking out that has a hill on it. I have shoulder-length brown hair, however, it is graying, and in the light, it reads as blonde. I have a window to the side of me as well. I'm wearing a burgundy dress, and I have some wired headphones and horn-rimmed glasses that look vaguely like one of our guests. We share matching glasses. But so today we are specifically exploring the topic of transformation, and we're specifically exploring this as it relates to our newly adopted UU values from this last General Assembly from the Article 2 language. And so I'd actually like to read that as we get started. The language around transformation as a value states, "We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages. Never complete and never perfect." And I'm so excited to be joined by two amazing guests, one who I formerly worked with and one who I currently work with. So it's quite the fun bunch here. And so the Reverend Dr. Jonipher Kwong, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us maybe a little bit about some initial thoughts about transformation?
Sure. It's good to be with you again, Ember. It's been a while. And my name is Reverend Dr. Jonipher Kwong, and I do use he or they pronouns. And I'm an Asian person in my mid to late 40s. And I have a painting in the background, which is of an artistic rendition of a flower. And I am wearing a dark blue suit with a jacket anyway, with a light blue shirt inside. And I have this little Unitarian Universalist pin of a chalice here. Go you use. And I am here to talk a little bit about transformation. And I do want to also say I'm currently the lead minister of the First Unitarian Congregation here in Toronto. So we do have some Canadian representation here. I am thinking a lot about transformation these days, especially after the US election and what it means for us to both engage in the healing process ourselves, as well as to figure out ways to heal the country and the world. So for me, transformation has very much everything to do with how we change ourselves and how we move from a place of despair and a place where there's a lot of perhaps anger and hurt and pain to one where we could find a greater sense of relief and solidarity with others and a way to heal our world, not from a paternalistic sense, but from a sense of by being together, by collaborating together, by sharing our love with one another. That's how we heal the world.
And we are also joined by the Jennica Davis-Hockett, who is one of our youth and emerging adult ministry staff on the same team as myself here at the Unitarian Universalist Association. Jennica, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Okay. So I use she, her pronouns, and I am also wearing burgundy today. I've got my like white jumper over the burgundy and long brown hair with bangs, cat rim glasses, um, white skin, purple tattoo, and I'm sitting in an orange chair, and behind me is like my bookshelf and an orange wall as well. Oh my gosh, Jonipher, I'm so excited to talk with you about this stuff too, because for me, healing is at the heart of transformation as well. I want to tell you a little bit more about myself, what I'm passionate about. I am so passionate about creating multi-generational communities of care with young people at the center. And that's why I love working with Ember so much. I'm sorry, Jonipher, that we stole Ember from you. But it's kind of like a fun circle we keep going in because I know we used to get to work together and UUA staff. And my personal passion is for supporting young people with marginalized identities, those people who are going through life's transitions, those people who are experiencing mental health challenges. And my spiritual practices that really help me do that work faithfully with integrity are my medicinal herb garden and flower garden, which I'm kind of in the planning the foundational phase right now because we're moving into fall and winter. Being able to sit with my Buddhist meditation sangha. I'm the parent of a 4-year-old, so really practicing what I heard called little a abolition parenting feels really important to me, the non-punitive parenting. And I'm a total nerd for relationship dynamics, being queer and polyamorous. So those things are probably going to show up in what I offer today. I just want, like, as my sort of thinking about what rises to the top, Ember, as you were reading the way that we've chosen to, the language we've chosen to use around transformation, I love that it includes openness to change and fundamental in the same breath. Like the only thing Unitarian Universalists are willing to be fundamentalist about is that everything changes. We have to be open to change. So that really resonates for me. I think, you know, in the opening breaths, it's important to mention how much I've been influenced by. And I know Unitarian Universalism has been influenced by Octavia Butler's book, Parable of the Sower. And the main character, Lauren Olamina, who her phrase throughout, her prayer throughout is, I want to say the whole thing right. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. And the only lasting truth is change. That feels like a real rallying cry for us as Unitarian Universalists.
I love it. I love, discovering the ways we are fundamentalists,
Yes.
fundamentalist for change. I think that'd be a great slogan. I'm going to talk to the bookstore and see if we can get a poster. Fundamentalists for change, sponsored by Just Breathe. But in naming like this, specifically the language from our wording that was chosen for Article 2, I think that the thing that stood out to me was this tension of mentioning the never complete and never perfect in the transformation discussion here, in the wording about transformation, because it's hard to admit that we're never complete and never perfect. That, there's always like a learning to do better. There's always a possibility that we can grow, that we can try and improve situations. Working with young people, when I was involved in activism as a young person myself, like thinking like, okay, like if we just do this, then it's finally going to be good enough and it's going to be better. And I think there's really this tension in transformation of how do we hold both this never complete, never perfect, and acknowledging that that's okay, but still striving towards better and improving. So I wonder if either of you have thoughts about how we hold that tension of being never complete and never perfect, but still trying to actively work on transforming.
Well, when I was a Methodist, not growing up, but when I was in college, I actually encountered United Methodism, and there was this great theological concept that they had called sanctification. And the whole idea is that you never really achieve sanctification in this lifetime, or even the next one, probably, but it's an ongoing process. And for me, as a process theologian, that's also when I encountered process and feminist theology, actually, was in college. And I fell in love with it because of the idea that we're all ever evolving and ever growing. And I love what you said, Jenica, about how that is the one theological root that we all hold dear, right? That according to James Luther Adams, revelation is not sealed. And so it's interesting to me how we buy into that as a concept. And yet, when we live it out in our congregations, that's a different story altogether. Because never have I been to a congregation where they embrace change in all aspects of congregational life, especially during worship, by the way, right? You introduce one change in the worship service, like joys and sorrows, for example. You take it from a spoken one to perhaps a candlelit one or another way of doing it. And you could bet that you're going to get those emails from congregants saying, why did you change that? Or why did you move that there? Or, why did you take the candle lighting out of Silent Night at the end? And I think our youth, more than anyone, know about this because growing up, they're used to going to cons where the worship experiences are more interactive and collaborative and all of that. So when they finally, as an adult, get to sit through those services and have to follow the same format every single Sunday and do the same thing over and over again, they're finding out that change isn't so easy after all. So it's this delicate tension of both wanting change and who should change and how change is brought about. And so what I've learned over the years is that there's actually not a lot of things out there that I could actually change, especially during the pandemic. I can't change the government's order for a lockdown. I can't change the time frame for when the vaccines were going to come out, so on and so forth. So the only person I could change is actually myself. And I love what you said, Jenica, about your spiritual practices, because at that time, mine was actually composting. And it's interesting to me how that act itself is a picture and an image of what change looks like. So you could turn rotten tomatoes and rotten vegetables and all the scraps and leaves even, just dump them all into one composting bin. And then over time, it transforms and it changes and it turns into something that could actually fertilize and plant new seeds and grow new vegetables and new fruit trees and whatever, right? So as Thich Nhat Hanh said, without the mud, you could get no lotus. So without this crappy stuff in our lives and stuff that we may not initially find useful, we could take that and transform it into something else.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. So when I'm still kind of thinking about parable of the sower and the concept of shaping change, and you're talking about, the only thing that we really, and do we even really have control over changing ourselves? We're sort of participating in the process of our own change and participating in the process of changing together. And I'm thinking about that, the anxiety that comes up when we are asked to change or when we're given a change that we didn't ask for, and that too much, too fast, or for too long, that's, when change is happening like that, that's what we call a crisis, or that's how, if we're not able to make meaning of that, then that's how that turns into trauma. So like, as religious professionals, as community leaders, as people who have this attention towards shaping change, I think it's our responsibility to be able to titrate that change in a way that is not tolerable, but like almost tolerable, I guess, because we want to expand folks' ability to tolerate discomfort without blowing past whatever their window is right now. And that makes me think of a concept I learned in my meditation sangha, which was sattva. Sattva is the idea of not too much and not too little, not too much energy, not too little energy, as we're trying to cultivate this. And I think back to what you said, Jonipher, about compost, that if you have too much nitrogen, then it's going to get stinky. If you have too much, not enough nitrogen, then that process, that heat isn't going to happen. Another thing I learned in my sangha, that's the first time I heard of Cole Arthur Riley, who wrote Black Liturgies. And we did this practice using this phrase that really came to mind when I heard this question from you, Ember, which is, as you inhale, you think, I am free not to know. And as you exhale, you think, I can rest in the mystery. And as we're in this process of perpetual transformation that we're not really in control of, but that we're participating and co-creating, that idea that I can actually rest in the mystery, that I don't have to know the answer, that I don't have to already have the outcome pre-designed to be able to participate, has been a very faithful phrase for me to hold on to.
Shockingly, for those who know me, this makes me think of boundaries. There's a joke amongst coworkers, when someone says boundaries, then in the chat goes, Ember loves boundaries. So I have a reputation. But, that's in thinking about the things that we are able to handle. We are only able to handle ourselves, how we're responding to a situation. One of the biggest lessons of perhaps the last 5-10 years of my adult life is you get all of this like, yes, I'm going to do this inner work, but if you're not doing that inner work and then seeing how that plays out in relation to other people, like you need to be able to have those boundaries and hold those concepts and be able to live and practice these out and do it together with others. And like that's the challenging moment. And so in thinking about transformation and thinking about us as congregationalists, that we operate in our congregations, whether we're youth in those congregations, volunteers or staff, just people attending, board members, whoever might be listening. What are the things that you think congregationally that we might need to kind of let go of as we pursue the transformation that we need in this moment of, and maybe compost, that's a great image. And it makes me think of Adrienne Maree Brown, and the idea that things die, but that's a natural part of the order of life. I've actually had that conversation with my own young kid who seems to be worried about death, and I've just explained that no, death is it's part of life. It's okay, like it'll happen someday. So what congregationally, what are the things that we perhaps could let be compost towards a new and brighter future? What are the things that we need to work on adjusting and changing and growing ourselves? Boundaries that we need to have, because I love those. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. This is one of my very favorite questions. What do we need to let go of? And especially in these times where we're like staring right in the face of fascism, of climate collapse, like we have, there's so much to do. And how are we going to do all that is required of us in this moment if we're still holding on to what we need to let go of? And for me, a lot of the, I'm going to speak from what I personally need to let go of. And a lot of it is around image as a white person, all of the stuff that I have been taught about what looking like a good, upstanding citizen is. I need to let go of that because it isn't serving me. And one thing that I've learned from is, what's his first name? Alfred Adler. So he's a psychologist that was at the same time as Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, but he didn't quite get as much airtime. But this Adlerian theory of change is part of it is about affirmative resignation. And that phrase really sticks to me. Affirmative resignation is actually accepting not who I wish I was, not the ideal version of myself. Even in UU circles, we talk about having covenants that are, wow, I've even let go of the word. Aspirational covenants. So not presenting the aspirational version of myself, but really accepting who I am, because that is the way that that's the only way I'll be able to access the things in myself that I need to change, the ways that I need to grow. But if I'm always trying to present a version of myself that is better, quote unquote, than the true version of, the raw material of what I'm working with, then I'm not going to be able to do the good work that I need to do. So that's one of my own personal leanings. And then I've got two more that are on my personal list. And one is, oh my gosh, I'm shaking even thinking of this idea of giving up my individual wealth. And because it's not a lot in the grand scheme, I'm like a drop in the bucket when it comes to the kind of wealth that our billionaires, soon to be trillionaires, have amassed. But I can see in my own life, I can witness in my own life that it's my personal wealth that is keeping me separate. I don't need to ask my neighbor to borrow a tool. I can just go to Home Depot and buy it. And just those small levels of saying, actually, I want to participate in the collective. I want to put my money into a kitty that we can all draw from, rather than the sort of hoarding of, I'm going to do it all myself. And I am particularly inspired by the UU Young Adults for Climate Justice, that they're really leading the way and calling our association to task when it comes to loosening the grasps of our collective, our wealth and our endowment, and especially the ways that wealth has been generated by fossil fuels, our reliance on fossil fuels. And I want to say that we have to let those things go, because it's that mutual aid, that interdependence that really teaches us that safety is an illusion. Security is an illusion. And especially when I think about me in my very comfortable middle-class white lifestyle in a city that is very attached to lifting up the police department as our sort of saviors and protectors, that state-provided safety is a huge illusion that keeps us separate from each other.
Thank you for touching on that, Jennica, because the phrase that immediately came to my mind when you asked the question, Amber, is letting go of white supremacy culture. Because as you defined earlier, transformation is not about perfectionism. And again, perfectionism is one of the manifestations of white supremacy culture, as well as the whole idea of individualism and that any of us could do this by ourselves, right? And so I love the idea, Jennica, of paying closer attention to a sense of collectivism. And I know there's currently 13, 14 manifestations that Tim Okun and Kenneth Jones put out there. But a congregant of mine just mentioned recently that what if we were to add a 15th one, which is about generosity? And I know that generosity is also part of the JETPIG acronym, right, of our new UU values. And I just wanted to point out that, it's nice to think about generosity in terms of material possessions and whatnot, but I also wanted to challenge us to think about generosity more broadly, and how we could also be generous with our words to one another and be less critical, right? And not focus on what went wrong, but actually how we could build on our strengths and build on those positive interactions that we have with one another. I think that's actually quite transformative. And to also be generous with our ways of offering healing. And what I mean by that, I want to go back to my original statement about how I define transformation. I want to point out that those of us who are historically marginalized already came with trauma, just by virtue of the fact that we didn't feel like we had a sense of belonging, especially in the Western world, right? Because of just who we are and our identities. So we already come to our congregations with trauma. So what if each individual congregation could realize that whatever type of ministry they do has to be trauma informed. So I think that's actually what's going to cause us to heal faster and to come to a greater understanding. So not this thing of let's just put a BIPOC person on our board or, put a youth representation on our board. So instead of looking at it that way, just look at it from the perspective of how can we meet the needs of those who are coming through our doors, wanting to find a sense of belonging, and what would being able to provide community for these folks look like from a trauma-based and trauma-informed type of ministry. So that's what I would like to encourage us to start taking a look at in terms of what we need to let go of, and in order to gain something that is much richer and much more reflecting of our broader communities, right? And I feel like if we did that, then that too brings about healing for already members of that congregation. So it's a win-win situation that we could potentially have here.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I really love that, Jonipher. That really hits home. Really thinking about redesigning the way Unitarian Universalism functions within our congregations, not as how can you serve us or what committee are you going to join? Although I think we'll probably have some time to talk about volunteerism and blah, blah, blah. But that if we could decenter Sunday morning, I don't know, maybe not for every congregation, but maybe in some congregations, maybe one idea is decentering Sunday morning, not getting rid of it, but decentering it in favor of meeting people where they are, which I'll speak for myself as a parent. I mean, Sunday morning is the one time of the week where I'm like, all right, kiddo, you get to watch Sunday morning cartoons and we can just hang out in our jammies all day. If someone in a UU congregation were to come to me and say, hey, how can I make your life easier? How can I, as a parent, how can I connect you with other parents? I would join right away because that's what I'm longing for. That's what I really need in my life right now.
Isn't that the whole concept of the whole full week faith idea, of
Totally.
and again, I feel like what if we were to just dissolve the walls of our churches completely? What would that look like, And it is quite revolutionary, as the producer of this production pointed out, that when we just start thinking about who we're actually serving and when we're generous that way and when we're giving, that tends to lessen even our own anxieties about our own lives and how much we need to accumulate for ourselves. Because again, I always hear from congregations about the numbers, right? Of what's giving look like and how many members do we have. But instead of focusing on that kind of numerical growth, which again is very much rooted in white supremacy culture of more is better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of let's take a look at what would actually increase our spiritual growth. What if that were to be the metric of quote unquote success for our congregations? And I think that that would naturally attract people like you, Jennica, and people like you, Ember, people with kids and people with who are dealing again with so many other issues going on in their lives right now that they just need a place where they could come recharge. That maybe that's what Sunday mornings are for, is to just recharge your energy and get fed that way so that you can deal with whatever else is going on the rest of the week. And can we find out creative ways of providing programming for the rest of the week as well? So I think it's both and. I don't want people to start freaking out and saying that, oh no, we're not going to provide Sunday services anymore. But I agree that that's simply not enough. 1 hour a week. And if you go over that, if you go, God forbid, 1 hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half, then you start getting complaints. Did I hear an amen to that, Amber? Because goodness knows, she's been the one editing my sermons before. Sometimes the preacher could get a little long-winded, but let's just see that as, grace happens. And again, why do we limit our spiritual engagement and our spiritual growth to just that one time a week?
Mhm.
Yes, I did learn the art of extemporaneous preaching from Jonipher. But as part of that mentoring was that behind the scenes in my video editing during our work together is that every time I would time out exactly how long Jonipher's message was, send a little text saying, "Hey, just so you know, this is how much you were over your 15-minute goal." And then we would joke with each other. It was, revenge was sweet when I accidentally preached a 45-minute Trans Day of Visibility service, but that's what Trans Day Visibility is about, is letting me ramble for 45 minutes. But that is not the point that I'm here to to hammer home, though. Is that listening to you, the thing that came to mind is thinking about seeing our congregations not as a place where individuals can come for service. And I think that this is like evangelicalism's influence, but I think that mainstream Protestantism, liberal religion in general, had also been doing this for quite some time. That it was you came to church for the service, like for a service that was being offered to you, a very capitalistic viewpoint, like that this is like, I will give, I get call from the minister, I get buried, I get married, I get these specific things, these rewards for being part of this. But how do we see it as this place for community? Like, even thinking about what you were saying about being able to go talk to your neighbor to, what if a congregation had a tool bank and you could go grab the tool that you needed to go do the thing. And I know that our other host, who's not here today because she's not feeling well, has in fact been working on thinking about like how do we teach kids how to use tools and like how do we teach these practical skills. And I know some of our religious education colleagues are doing really great thinking about how do we teach kids like these life skills, which relates to me in thinking about the youth on Sunday mornings and why the old model of Sunday school just isn't working. And that is that kids' lives have become so jam-packed that they basically have six, and especially working in the New York City metro area, almost just like 7.5. They're adding time to the days to somehow fit in more days of school than there is days in the week. That these kids are so pushed to just constantly be learning, constantly involved in a program, constantly involved and plugged in, and to be able to offer them space in our programming to just belong and have community and not have new homework. Like, yes, learn things, but not like feel like it's going to be a lecture that you're getting a test on. Like that old model of Sunday school, of like, here's 30 lessons that will get you a neatly wrapped present by the end of like, you can pass this basic theology test. That's not what you need right now. And I think even thinking on that is, are we as communities addressing like the reality, the material needs, like what is actually going on in these youth's lives and our adults' lives and the whole congregation's lives? What is going on? And one of the things in my work that I've done is, and that I like to remind people, and kind of my closing thought of my rambles here is that reminding people that we don't need to aspire to be like some model perfect church that they think is like the perfect goal that they need to reach of, like 10,000 members and live streaming their services to all 7 continents. And, we don't need that. What if we can just be the exact community that we need to be for the space that we're in, for the people that we have, and that the people who then come and experience that will feel the warmth and belonging and the care so that they want to be involved in that. That will sell to people far more than come try our newest fancy things that we can offer you. In my mind, as I think that yeah, we need to let go of this aspirational culture. I know you were talking about that, Jonipher, but yeah, how can we move to just being communities for each other instead of thinking of this as a space where we're offering an offering that we've paid for, a service that we've paid for, a transactional relationship. How can we, move to thinking about community?
Yeah, I just participated in the threshold, or not participated as a witness in the threshold conversation that was somebody, maybe it was Kirsten had said, Kirsten Hunter, I believe, had said, use the phrase, you don't babysit your own kid, so you don't volunteer at church. Like you are co-creating this community together. So it's not volunteering an hour of your time. This is part of the life you're creating with us. That's what I'm hearing you say, Amber, moving from transactional to transformational.
So, Jenica, another conversation that we've had a few times, and Jonathan, we've had some of these conversations as well. I've called it building community in the apocalypse. And Jenica, I know that there's a phrase that you use that's slightly less intimidating than building community in the apocalypse.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think it's still pretty intimidating because it's faith formation in a dying and transforming world. It's back to that affirmative resignation or whatever, that this is a dying world. So that's kind of scary.
But it's got transforming in the name, which then
That's
connects
true.
it to the value. I use the language apocalypse because I grew up evangelical. I grew up expecting that when I woke up and didn't find my parents outside of the area right away, that maybe the rapture had happened and that the end of the world had come and I was doomed to 7 years of horrible things happening. And so, maybe I'm infected by the apocalypse from growing up that way. But I think that, we have to face there is a sense that a lot of the old order of things is dying. Yeah, Gramsci is the one who comes to mind. Gramsci talked about that it was the time of monsters because the new world was being born, and like this idea that this is a scary moment. Like as the old ways of doing things, as this framework that we thought was like some eternal framework that would forever last, uh, once we realize that's not the case, once we realize that white supremacist culture, once we realize that settler colonialism, that all of these are just a fake facade of power that has been, sold and propagandized to us, what does it look like to be transformed in the challenging times? I already named the thing that to me is perhaps the most important, which is like grounding in what are the physical, the material, the communal needs. Like that's a thing that constantly is on my mind as I think about this. But I'd be curious for both of you, what do you think it looks like for our congregations, for the work that we do to be transformed in these dying and transforming times?
Well, the teaching that comes to my mind immediately actually comes from the Talmud, and it says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now." Apologies for the ableist language. "You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." So I think the temptation for many of us, myself included, sometimes is to just move away from it and or be resigned to it. I think, that was part of the title, right? Something resignation, affirmative resignation. Is that right, Jennica? Something like that, right? So the idea is to not, well, and in my case, just move to Canada. Except that'll solve everything, right? Because we all know that fascism is on the rise everywhere, not just the US. And so who knows? It might even follow me here at some point. But the idea is to, from where we are, do whatever we can at the moment, whatever good we can, right? Because these challenges actually existed for a very long time. I grew up in the same kind of, or similar anyway, Ember, evangelical background as you. I know all about the rapture and the whole millennium and all that stuff from the book of Revelations. But upon going to seminary, figured out that the book of Revelations was actually written about that time 2,000 years ago in Rome. And John of Patmos was writing about the Roman Empire and the fall of the Roman Empire and how corrupt and evil it was. It was just as much an existential apocalypse back then as it probably feels like today. So there's nothing new under the sun. People have been thinking that the world is coming to an end for a very long time now. And yet they kept doing it anyway. They still resisted empire back then. And that's what John was writing about in Revelation, is to continue to resist the empire that we have now, because this is exactly what we're witnessing, the end of the American empire.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it's dragging the rest of the world with it, right? So what do we do about it as people of faith? What do we do about it as Unitarian Universalists? And again, I go back to the Talmud, and it's the same thing we had to do and the same calling we've had all along, which is to do justice, to love mercy, and to be humble with one another in whatever it is that we do, and to continue to be curious and to continue to do our mission all along, which is to increase the sum of love and justice in the world, in a sense. So that's what I would encourage us to do. I know it's hard because there's a lot of distractions going on all around us, and a lot of threats to our very lives. And I get that. And in order to not fall into despair or to immobilization, let's just find something to do, however tiny it is, and however small we may think our sphere of influences are, because it matters to those people that we're serving.
Mm. Yes, even in the face of apocalypse, resist anyway. I think about Joanna Macy's book, Active Hope, and that in it she says, you have to turn towards the grief, not away from it. Turn towards the fear, not away from it. And truly sitting with the grief of a dying world is, in that grief, that's where you find your purpose. That's where you find, like, whatever breaks your heart open, that's the place that you need to move towards. And yeah, I think of us all being death doulas in this moment. I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, should I become a death doula? And I still might, because I think that is one of the most sacred, well, that is, I'm going to say it, the most sacred transition we experience in our lifetimes. And just like every other part of our sacred moments of transition, it's been capitalized on, and it's become part of this medical complex. And I would like to see us being able to face that fear, and especially when it comes to the fear of conflict that we have with each other, and even the fear of, our internal conflicts, reckoning with our pasts and where we want to go forward. Because I think that's how if we can like move into conflict without feeling the grasping of whatever the outcome is, predetermined outcome, that's how we ourselves are transformed and the relationship is transformed. I also want to say, in preparation for this episode, of course, I listened to the previous episodes, and of course, then had to watch Trolls World Tour immediately. And this, I don't think it's a spoiler, but at the very end, Queen Poppy's father says to her, you are not naive, you are brave enough to know the world can change. And that really hit home for me, that we have to have, we have to have that sense of bravery to participate in the change that we want to see.
And exciting news, I can report that the Trolls did make it onto my Apple Music replay for how much I listened to them with my kids. Um, that, however, I would not consider a spiritual practice, though in light of the recent podcast, perhaps I will. While we have talked death and composting and some heavy topics, I kind of want to wrap us up here with something a bit more, I hesitate to call it positive, uh, lighter ending than death. Um, and that is thinking about what is maybe a practice that is transformative in your life right now. I personally, as you were talking, Jonipher, about Revelations and Rome, it reminded me of this practice that I have, that I subscribe to this YouTube channel that talks about human prehistory. And I actually have found exploring history and realizing like the span of like human or human-esque or humanoid experiences, and like just grasping like the experiences that people have gone through, like the Ice Age. Imagine an apocalypse, living through that. So that is something that I've been doing as a transformative practice. So I'd be curious if either of you, in a few sentences, have a transformative practice that is meaning a lot to you as an individual.
Not that I don't spend my time thinking about the enormity of the world's griefs and woes, but I find so much fulfillment in just washing the dishes. The reason I look to the right is because that's where the kitchen is. And no, I will not come over to your house and wash your dishes for you. Mine's enough. And it's just the beauty of seeing something dirty, and then I just apply a little bit of soap to it and some water, and it comes out clean. I hardly ever use the dishwasher, by the way. I do this hand washing thing because it turns into a spiritual practice for me. And it reminded me of what Thich Nhat Hanh said about how anything, if you do it mindfully, could actually become a spiritual practice. So that's my recommendation, is to find just small acts of transformation in your life from something that you might perceive as being ugly or dirty or unclean to something that is different from that.
I used to have a housekeeping business, and that was the most satisfying part of the day. It's before I closed the door behind me, taking a look at what, the good work that I had done. My spiritual practice is, going back to, I almost called her Reverend Olamina. I think maybe by the time she gets her community together for the parable of the talents, she becomes kind of a minister figure. But anyway, okay. So, the very beginning of Parable of the Sower, Lauren she has to go to school. She has to go to the schoolhouse that her parents and her friends' parents have put together for them to be able to learn the old ways, to be able to practice community building, and have those fundamental skills that then basically, when her community gets burned down, that's what she takes with her out into the world. And that's what she takes with her onto the California highways. That is what I'm focusing on with my family right now and myself right now, is just what skills do I need to cultivate in community with other people to be able to withstand whatever comes next, to be able to be available to whatever comes next.
Thank you both for sharing. Youth, in case you weren't listening, that's pay attention to history lessons, do the dishes, and do your chores. So, just there's your spiritual practices, takeaways for our youth listening.
Stay in school, kids.
Oh, I'm so thankful for the chance to get to be with both of you today. It has been a wonderful and deep and meaningful conversation. So thank you both for joining us today.
This has been so fun. Thank you for the
It
invitation.
has been. Thanks both for the wisdom, and thanks for the invite, Amber.
And to our listeners, 2025 is fast approaching. 29 days, I believe. My youngest has a countdown. So as we're recording this, it's 29 days. But it's fast approaching, and perhaps by the time you're listening to this, it might already be 2025. We're so excited for our upcoming episodes of this season, and we hope that you make it your New Year's resolution to like, subscribe, share this podcast. You can check it out on YouTube, or if you're watching it on YouTube, you can check it out on your favorite podcast streaming service. And make sure to tune in for the other conversations that are going to be upcoming this season of Just Breathe. We're going to have some amazing guests. And don't forget, you can also follow us on Instagram at Just Breathe Pod, and that's JUSTBREATHEPOD. Look, I'm going to write a song about that one. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you once again to our guests. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.